Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off because today I'll be reviewing and paging through Call of Cthulhu, Reign of Terror from Chaosium Inc. Are these two tales of terror perfect for a standalone campaign or for inclusion in the epic Horror on the Orient Express? Or should you try not to lose your head over what's essentially two overhyped Call of Cthulhu adventures which provide nothing revolutionary at all? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be reviewing Call of Cthulhu, Reign of Terror from Chaosium Inc. This is written by Mark Morrison with Penelope Love, James Cocolot, and Darren Watson, with artwork provided by Victor Leza, Delphines Desvoris, Dennis Carell, Steph McAlee, and Oliver Sanfilippo. I apologize because I'm sure I have mispronounced most of those people's names. This 128-page hardcover is available for an MSRP of $34.95, or you can grab the PDF over at Drive-Thru RPG for $17.95. Do want to mention, if you are looking to get the PDF and might follow up and get the hardcover, by all means, order it from the Chaosium Inc. website because they will credit that PDF towards the physical book, or if you buy the physical book, you get the PDF. If you're only looking to get the PDF, then by all means, please swing over to Drive-Thru RPG. But before you do so, stop at thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our drive-thru banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a little portion of that sale. And all those nickels, dimes, and quarters really do add up and help keep thegaminggang.com around. All right, without further ado, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I have Call of Cthulhu, Reign of Terror. First off, before I jump in, do want to mention the fine folks over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to send me this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share my thoughts about this book with you. It is very, very important for you to know that. So this book came out in 2017. It won an Annie Award in 2018 for Best Supplement. It takes place during the French Revolution. It has a tie-in to Horror on the Orient Express because it shares, one of the adventures in this, shares the same big bad as that campaign does. You do not necessarily have to run this as a part of Horror on the Orient Express. Of course, it is kind of designed that way, but once again, you don't have to. I will discuss that in a little more depth as we dive into the book as well. So let's take a peek at the back. I am not going to read everything from the back of the book, just give you an idea. So, shadows of the mythos amidst the horrors of the French Revolution. The crowds gather, baying for blood, while the chop, chop, chop of the guillotine calls out. A time of struggle, intrigue, and horror. A divided country where the upper class enjoys the bounty of wealth and the poor cannot afford a loaf of bread. Where the cries of anger and rage at life's injustices find momentum, sparking the people to unite and cast away the old regime for a brighter and more hopeful tomorrow. In time, hope will be replaced with fear as the terror descends upon France and the guillotine cries out for blood. All right, so we're going to jump into the book. I am going to be staying picture in picture up here in the corner, so I am going to actually be cutting off some parts of the pages in this book as we take a peek. We're not going to look at every page either. So I know this book has been out for a while, but still, I don't want to provide any ammunition for pirates out there. So we're going to take a look jumping on in, we get an introduction. One of the things I really do like about Reign of Terror is that there is a lot of history included in this book. Do I feel there's enough history for you to just run this without taking a peek at anything else about the French Revolution? No, I don't. There is still some things that you should probably take a peek at. Even if you just watch, an hour-long documentary or check out the Wikipedia page, it's important for you to understand what's going on in France at this time. There are 2 adventures in here, and there's a period of about 5 years in between the 2. One is on the cusp of the French Revolution, and the other is in the midst of the terror that has descended on France following the revolution. So we got some background info. We have pre-generated characters as our investigators. They are all soldiers, and you can roll up your own characters if you'd like. It is probably best served that you use the pre-gens. Now, the way this adventure is supposed to take place, both parts, is as a flashback during Horror on the Orient Express. Now, it has been a long time since I read Horror on the Orient Express. In fact, if you follow the Gaming Gang, if you watch my live show, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, you know I just received the 2-volume set of Horror on the Orient Express from Chaosium Inc. I have not dived into it yet, but this is designed as a flashback. Now, if memory serves, there's a few different flashbacks in Horror on the Orient Express. I got to be honest, I don't know if I'd run this as a flashback. I would run this as part of Horror on the Orient Express as something that would be leading up to it. I will talk about that a little more when I provide my final thoughts and review score. So the first part, 1789, and I'm going to try to stay relatively spoiler free because even though this has been out for a while, I do know that Call of Cthulhu players tend to check out these videos from time to time. So once again, try to keep it spoiler free, but there are some things that I have to talk about. And of course, there is artwork in here that's going to give away some things as well. So essentially what our story begins, and once again, the player characters are all soldiers, and they are actually guarding the catacombs as bodies are being moved from cemeteries into the catacombs. And that kicks off the story. Something takes place while they're doing that actually ramps up the story. There is the big bad from Horror on the Orient Express is in this first adventure, and they are at the height of their power. They are a vampire. I would do my best running this, especially if I'm running this as part of Horror on the Orient Express. I would not want to make it obvious that the Comte is a vampire. I just feel it'd play out far better with Horror on the Orient Express if you don't play up that aspect. I mean, for all you know, as far as the investigators are concerned, it could just simply be some cultist who is, studied magics and has, some things going on behind the scenes. So one thing I also like about this first adventure too is that it tries to play upon the debauchery of the noble class in France during this time. And the palace at Versailles, which is gorgeous if you go to France to see that now, was not in the greatest of shape. It was kind of shabby, and part of it was used as an apartment complex, essentially. And I love how this adventure incorporates that in, because the characters will visit the palace. So essentially what the investigators are trying to do is they are trying to get evidence against the Comte, who is the big bad, especially in Horror on the Orient Express. and to be able to have him brought to justice, have him incarcerated in the Bastille or sent off to an insane asylum or what have you. So what happens is the player characters are actually able to find a lot of stuff that they can use against the Comte. And because they're soldiers, there is a raid at the end of the adventure. Kind of think to yourself a little bit of a Shadow over Innsmouth kind of vibe to it, except it's with French soldiers. And it can lead to kind of a bloodbath, possibly with the investigators as well. So that is something that you want to try to keep in mind. Also, something that keepers want to also keep in mind is there are some things going on, some of that debauchery that I was talking about that may not play out so well at your gaming table. You might want to hand wave some of the things that are going on, especially at the festival, the party that hopefully the investigators use as kind of as a screen for their assault on the townhouse, essentially, where the Comte lives. Or I should say, I guess it's not really a townhouse, a country house. So that is the first adventure. Hopefully the player characters are able to take care of the Comte de Fenric. And they're no longer in the picture. So they will not appear again until being revealed as a big bad in Horror on the Orient Express. But there's a lot of things, especially in the first adventure, that kind of plant seeds for what happens in Horror on the Orient Express. That's why I had mentioned that this is really designed for inclusion into that campaign. Shouldn't stop you from just running this as a 2-adventure mini campaign as well, though. And if you did something like that, then by all means, you can play up the Comte as a vampire all you want. Although there are some things that'll be going on in that adventure, which will lead relatively clever investigators to realizing that the Comte is probably Nosferatu the undead. So we have a section talking about the revolution itself, and we have some information as well. I got to be honest, I have never been to Paris, so I can't tell you how spot on any of this information as far as locations, various locales might be. It seems like it's legit, but you never know. So we get into the second adventure, which is actually a longer adventure. And now we're in the midst of the terror. This is where Robespierre and his compatriots are just bringing anybody and everybody they can who might disagree with any of their ideas, just taking them off and having their heads cut off. And there are guillotines all throughout France that are day in, day out, chopping away. And this second adventure plays upon that. And what happens is that one of the investigators' allies from the first adventure has actually been exposed to the evil Comte's books. He had acquired them, and now he's just as bad or possibly worse than the Comte, because the Comte basically just cares about his own satisfaction, his own power, whereas the previous ally, he wants to bring about the destruction of Paris and who knows, possibly the world. And that's what's taking place in this second adventure. I got to be honest, I like the second adventure a little bit more than I do the first adventure. I like the first adventure too, don't get me wrong. But there are some tie-ins between the two adventures as well. There are some tie-ins to Lovecraft's own stories, the music of Eric Zahn, as an example. There is a section here, like a scene with the player characters and this musician composer, and his wife and his child. It might be a little tricky as far as how you want to play that off, because it can be pretty horrifying, and there's a little kid involved. So keepers should probably be aware of that right off the bat when running the adventure, that you're going to have a period, you're going to have a point, you're going to have kind of a turning point that the players are going to have to decide on the fates of this little kid and his mother, essentially. All right. Anyway, so that is essentially what's going on with the adventure. The player characters are, second adventure especially, are tasked with stopping the destruction of Paris. And they have some allies they can utilize as well in that. It's kind of interesting because when you're supposed to start off this little mini campaign, you're supposed to set the scene during the terror, and one of the player characters is being marched off and up to the guillotine to be executed, but the players don't know who it is, which I found kind of interesting. I like the tie-in. And then there are all these little things in that scene that you set right at the beginning that, as the players continue through the adventure, they'll experience the various different non-player characters who happen to be on the scene there. I thought it was really nicely done. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm not sure how it'll play out at the table, but in words, it looks pretty good. All right, so then we'll finish up. We've got some characters and monsters for the different sections as well. We have a timeline and bibliography for those out there who want more information about the revolution as well as the terror. We have occupations for investigators if you would like to roll up your own. Once again, if you are going to use this as part of Horror on the Orient Express, I would just recommend going with the pre-gens. If you're just going to do this as a knockoff, just, a few sessions long, then I would also recommend you go with the pre-gens, because there are some aspects to their backstories that will tie into other NPCs throughout both adventures. So we also have some scenario seeds if you'd like to kind of fill in the gaps between the end of the first adventure and the beginning of the second adventure. As I mentioned before, there's a 5-year gap. So we've got some seeds here as well that you can utilize. Thought those were interesting as well. Then, of course, we've got all the various different handouts for the players. Got some maps, and then we've got our pre-gens that you're going to utilize as well. I thought it was kind of cool because there's no call that you have to have 6 players at your table. So if you have fewer than 6 players, there's also advice on which one of these investigators that you're going to want to use, and then you can keep some in reserve, because this can be pretty lethal in both of these adventures. All right. And then we get an index, and that finishes up. We get some biographies of the authors as well. And that is Call of Cthulhu, Reign of Terror from Chaosium Inc. Let's swing on over to the other camera, because I am going to provide some final thoughts as well as my review score. So I already mentioned, as we were looking through, I do like both adventures that are included in Reign of Terror. I do like the second adventure more than the first, but I do also like the first adventure. I don't want you to think, oh yeah, for poo-poo on the first adventure and the comped vampire. No, I like that as well. The thing with that adventure is you're really looking to try to tie that really into Horror on the Orient Express. And because in Horror on the Orient Express, the player characters in that massive epic campaign do encounter some journal entries of an officer of the investigators in this adventure. So you want to try to tie those things together. So, of course, player characters will be like, oh, well, hey, we just played through an adventure about that. Now, the second adventure really doesn't have a lot to do with Horror on the Orient Express. And I got to admit, I like that as well, because you've already done kind of like your flashback if you're using it that way. And then here's what happens afterwards. This is what happens during the terror. There's no mention of any of this, as far as I understand, in Horror on the Orient Express. So I like that as well. So using this as a flashback, I don't know if I would do that. Essentially, what I would probably look to do, and this is just me as a keeper, I have run Call of Cthulhu since it first came out, so a long time, and yes, I know, I'm old. I would personally run this as something along the lines of the kind of prologue adventure to Mask of Nyarlathotep. So the newest edition of Mask of Nyarlathotep has it's not necessarily an introductory adventure, but it is to introduce a major NPC to the characters who will actually draw them into that campaign later on down the line. I would sort of look at this. I would present this to my players, especially if we were going to start, a new campaign and everything. I would present this as, hey, you know what? I ran across this. This is really cool. It's got some really cool adventures in here. And I know we're usually playing the 1920s and that, but humor me for a few sessions. Let's play this. Run through Reign of Terror, and then, of course, move into, if you're doing, the 20s, and if you're going to run Horror on the Orient Express, I would probably recommend maybe 2 or 3 kind of standalone short adventures, and then start Horror on the Orient Express, and then suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, that standalone that we were doing actually has something to do with this. That's how I would do it. I would not run it as a flashback, because once again, as I mentioned, there are, I think, like 3 flashback adventures in Horror on the Orient Express already. I might be wrong. Like I said, it's been a long time since I read it, but I thought there's like 3 flashback adventures in it already. I think using this as a flashback kind of takes something away from it. Just my opinion. So what do I think of Reign of Terror all in all? I really like it. I can see why it won an Emmy Award. I will point out, if you really want to pull this off effectively, you do want to do a little more research about the French Revolution, and probably especially the Reign of Terror, the real Reign of Terror that took place, and kind of focus a little bit on just before Robespierre himself is off to the guillotine. But I really like it. I think it works really, really well, even as just a standalone mini campaign, because not everybody wants to get, tied up into a months or years long campaign like Horror on the Orient Express. These 2 adventures work very well together as a standalone mini campaign as well. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give this a 9 out of 10. I have some minor quibbles. Once again, I don't like, the way it's presented as run it as a flashback during Horror on the Orient Express. Not keen on that. There are a few kind of tricky sections in here as well that you want to make sure that if you present it as written, that you're playing with a mature group who can handle something like that. Because remember, Call of Cthulhu can get pretty scary, pretty creepy. I think creepy is a better word. I don't think People really get scared sitting around a game table. But some people can't be creeped out. Isn't that part of what we're trying to do as keepers anyway? All right. Once again, a 9 out of 10. So I seriously do recommend Call of Cthulhu, Reign of Terror from Chaosium Inc. All right. That is it for this time out. If you like this video, please do me a favor. Give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also tell you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday through Thursday nights right here on YouTube as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news and looks at board games, role-playing games, miniatures games, and more. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Oh, you're still here. Well, while you're kicking it, how about subscribing to the Gaming Gang channel? Or seeing the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch? Or finding out what YouTube recommends you check out here at my channel? And of course, don't forget, get your geek on at thegaminggang.com.